English sparkling wine with fish and chips. There we go.
Well, that'd be delicious. Any mushy peas?
No,
So,
they can stay in the
no.
bin. No, I'm not interested. I love peas, but they don't need to be mushy.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Flavour. This is a bit of an experiment, a new thing where I get to geek out a little bit about food, taste, and obviously a little bit of wine. Got a great guest today, Ben Ebbrell from Sorted Food. Um, Welcome, Ben. Thank you for taking part.
No, pleasure. Always happy to talk about food and wine. Always.
Excellent. Well, we first met, I believe, at a wine fair, London Wine Fair. We might as well kick off with a bit about wine. Why were you there? What's fascinated you about the wine world?
Um, I think it's just the sheer depth, and I think it's one of those. For many years, I liked wine. I knew what I liked. I liked what I knew, and that was it. It was my very own little bubble. Lockdown and COVID saw me explore a bit more, and I did some wine qualifications. I did the WSET level 2 and 3, and that's when I really realised how little I knew. Because the more you learn, the more you realise there's so much more still to learn, and that's I think what intrigues me is this constant journey. Um, and I'm now a stickler for I would probably rather have a new average glass of wine because that's a journey than a wine that I know I'm going to like because I think that every glass is an opportunity to learn.
For sure. Have you done so? You've done that magic jump then from getting that comfort wine, maybe every so often that's nice and reliable to now anything unrecognizable or
Anything
interesting
new.
is pretty
Yeah,
exciting. Yeah.
exactly that. And yeah, and we met at London Wine Fair because I was just wanted to throw myself into that world, and I did exactly that and spoke to a whole bunch of people who I realised had so much knowledge trapped inside their minds, and I've just over the last few years tried to eke some of it out and absorb some of it. So yeah,
Yeah, it's an amazing show, that one. It's just a trade event, but there's so much to go and taste from all over the world that's really exciting. Yeah, when I saw you there, I have to admit, because me and my wife are big fans of sorted food, watched a lot of your videos, and it was great to see uh, you from your space kind of cross over into the wine industry, because one of the things I've talked about with a lot of wine people is actually how much it's such an interesting subject, but never really gets properly communicated in a way that you've done a great job of with food and sorted food to bring that kind of food knowledge, but also try new things and different cultures, different chefs, different voices out there in quite a fun, almost gamified sort of way over the years. I know you've changed a lot of the formats and experimented with lots of things. If we go all the way back before we go too deep into wine, because that's very dangerous territory for me. Um, Sorted food, when you set it up, there's four of you, right? Talk a bit about people who might not know what sorted food is. Can't be many of them now, but what is it?
yeah. I mean, in a nutshell, it's a friendship more than it is a food and cooking channel. So the four of us, I mean, now you see many more familiar faces on screen, but the four of us who began, so Barry, Jamie, Mike, and myself, we all knew each other from school. So literally 28 years of friendship. Um, but we had one thing in common, and that was this situation where, generally speaking, normal home cooks, and I say normal because chefs are not normal, we are very peculiar in our thinking. But normal home cooks haven't often been taught to cook. We're not taught at school. That's a big problem. So rather than make that the hurdle, we made that the challenge. So every week for the last 15 years, we've been exploring food as a conversation. And food and drink and cooking, and now some wine occasionally, is always the catalyst. But actually, friendship is the backbone. And it's us just hanging out together, constantly making new friends in the food world. And that comes before cooking with chefs to farmers and producers as well. Um, but actually understanding more about where our food comes from and the future of food and how rich it can be to bring people together as a community. And that started 15 years ago. And now we've got millions of people around the world who gather 3 times a week to talk about food with us on YouTube. And it's great.
Yeah, it's amazing. And was it always food at the beginning? Was that something that you all shared with the same sort of passion?
Um, it was for me. I was a chef. So I trained to be a chef, or was training at the time we launched, where the other guys were at university away from home, realizing they couldn't cook. So for them, anything that was quick and simple and cheap and cheerful and used very little kitchen equipment and was very accessible and speedy and impressive for friends. That was all the motivations of the kind of recipes we were creating at the time. And then when we graduated and we were no longer students, we dropped the S word because no one wants to be associated with a student the moment you've graduated. And yet we all have all the same challenges every single day. How do you get dinner on the table quick, simply, affordably, nutritionally, in a fun way that's constantly learning something new? So the sentiment hasn't changed. We're just not students anymore.
Yeah, no, I mean, and what's interesting is it seems to have coincided with the time that people went out and had to kind of stand up on their own 2 feet, going to uni, you training as a chef. It's quite, I remember actually when I first discovered chili through my wife. I say first discovered chili. There are little bits of chili in my childhood, but my parents were sort of the curry korma type chili
Yep.
crowd, a little bit light, some coconut milk. I remember going up to Birmingham to family friends and having a Thai green curry and thinking, crikey, this is hot. But in uni, my wife's vegetarian, and when we
Mm-hmm.
met, we had to, or I started opening up to lots of different dishes because vegetarian forces you to cook interesting things, I think. And chili was a big part of that, but it was almost, I don't know if this is a immaturity thing, but I got so into the taste of chili at the time that it then went into absolutely everything. So you're adding chopped chili to your pasta dishes, all of it. And then it got to a point where now I can handle quite a lot of spice, but interestingly, while chili or that kind of comfort food was great at university and exploring different things was happening, it went a similar way to what happened with wine,
Mm-hmm.
after you've started to discover new things. The really exciting thing is going to a restaurant and having a dish you might never have tasted before. But I'm also aware that intimidates a lot of people to try something new. So you as a chef then, what motivated you to really, because I mean doing something every week and keeping that for 15 years and now ramping it up to 3 times a week. What's the motivation behind food for you?
I think it's an addiction to learning, actually, and I think that's why the wine conversation is really interesting because there's always something else to learn. And even after all this time, we are still finding new things to talk about, and whether that is the future of food and literally new innovation that's never existed before, or it's something that happened hundreds of years ago and it's the history of food that we didn't realize, and then you join the dots between how food has evolved and the migration of people and cuisine, ingredients over the centuries. I find it all really fascinating. And then we know we have an audience who are equally enthused by it. So it's just finding new ways to package it up and pass on that information, but without it ever being preachy or teachy because we're not experts. We're just on this journey learning together. Come join the journey. And it should feel, we hope, like you're kind of joining us at pub table. You're the extra seat at the table. It's where Sorted started, literally an idea on the back of a beer mat. And we hope that every video is like, join us as if you're sat opposite us. It should feel very personal and interactive because we're all still learning. And food, the catalyst for it all, I mean, it's endless. We will never run out of things to talk about.
Yeah, which is amazing because it'll keep you busy for life then, won't it?
For sure.
Um,
Thank goodness.
and, and it's interesting what you say about the back of a beer mat. George and I founded Novel Wines on the back of a beer napkin outside a pub. Even though it's a wine business, we were still having a pint at the time. I feel like that
All the
is
best
a
ideas are fueled
hotspot.
around, yeah, socializing. And certainly in the UK, that generally centers around alcohol, or certainly has done for many decades gone by. Seems to be on the down now. Whole generations being much more mindful and drinking a lot less, if at all. But certainly in the years that we've grown up, the answer was always a pint or a glass of wine or something, a drink, a cider, or whatever, in a pub garden, stood outside a pub, at home. Alcohol was always there. And that's where the best ideas happened.
Yeah, that socializing thing has changed today. I feel like having worked with a lot of younger people, it's been replaced with run clubs.
Yeah.
Um, which, as lovely as it is, I still make the old man joke of what are you running away from because I do a run for a few kilometers and get shin splints and have to sit down. So I'm only 31. It sounds terrible, but there you go. Yeah, I mean, how is that relationship just to stick with sort of food and the four of you for now? Because I know you've had other people join. It's a much bigger team now. But for the four of you, as you've kind of all matured and you've grown into your own lives and things, how's that dynamic and that friendship today? Has it moved into that professional space, or is it still very much your friends and you're kind of having this passion side? Because to do 3 videos a week, it's got to be pretty relentless at times as well, right?
Yeah, and I'm I'm speaking to you now from LA, so 8 hours behind, and we travel a lot together as well to do food and travel content. So sometimes we are away and literally in each other's, pockets, whether it's a shared house or hotel rooms, and then 16 hours of filming a day. They're busy, and we are always on. So you have to still have that want to do it and that kind of core friendship. However, also as a business, it has matured and it is much more kind of professional in the kind of production realm to make sure that we're always churning out the content that we're proud of and that it's continuing to push Sorted forward. But over the years, I don't think we could have achieved what we have if it wasn't for that backbone of friendship. And we've all changed an awful lot in 28 years or 15 years since we've done this, whether it's families, wives, kids, health scares, travel, other life commitments that come and go. But actually, we always know that if any one person needs an extra bit of time or space, the other three will pick up the slack, and we always have done. So you just need that transparency and honesty and conversation always. And thank goodness we don't always agree, because I think it'd be a really weird space if we all violently agreed with everything. We don't violently disagree, but we have some heated discussions about, where we're taking the business, where our focuses are, what's important. However, again, back to beer and the beer mat and a pub, no argument that can ever not be resolved by the end of the day by sitting down and talking about it. And that's healthy, actually, having some disagreements and working out what's next. And the disagreements come because we're also passionate about doing the right thing.
Yeah, that tension can create beautiful things
Yeah,
sometimes. Rachel, who you might have met before, our technical manager at Can, very chemistry focused. A wine's got to be da 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 da. Me, it's all about passion, flavor. If
yeah.
I fall in love with something, even if it's Saint Laurent and I've got to sell it in the UK and no one knows what it is, we're going for it.
That's a
But
mountain we're going to
that
climb. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. But that nice tension is the spawn of creativity, right? It's good
absolutely.
ideas get better through different conversations.
And some
Um,
of the
you,
best some of the best content we've ever done have come out of necessity. I think, people look at the channel now, and 15 years ago we were a short recipe how-to channel. We've gone through a whole bunch of stuff through challenges and kind of gamification. We do a lot of review and conversation based formats, lifting a cloche, but that all came out of COVID because we had to be 2 meter distanced. So we literally had to work out how to come up with a brand new thing that enabled us to one person to sit with something under a cloche, 2 meters away from someone who was on the side with the information that was going to be revealed, 2 meters away from the production team who were shooting on a long lens. That literally came out of necessity, and now it's one of our most popular formats. And we put kitchen gadgets, pretentious ingredients, food trends. We put it all under a cloche and have a conversation. But it came out of necessity and struggle and challenge, not just the freedom to do whatever we want. And I think the friendship, to your point of the kind of the sometimes the frictions, great things come of it.
yeah, no, I love that. And to be fair, if I do find those videos some of your best. They're very addictive to watch those. I particularly like the pretentious ingredient stuff because this conversation around price equals better value, there's always a line. I think there's a sliding scale with everything, to be honest. Do you ever have you got a food item or anything you've had before where you genuinely do see the more money you spend, the better you're getting?
I would say there is always a line for sure, but I would say 9 times out of 10, it's meat, fish, and dairy. And I think that comes down to animal welfare and the space and the passion that the farmers and producers put into it. But I think the more you spend on good artisanal cheese, the better the cheese is. I think the more you spend on good meat from a butcher where you know its provenance, the butcher can tell you which farmer, which field even that lamb or beef or whatever was running around in and enjoying life. I think they're the things where the correlation between price and quality track. There is always a line, and sometimes it does go to the silly. Um, but I would say, yeah, high protein, so meat, fish, and cheese or dairy is where spend as much as you can afford because you will get better value for that.
Do you ever regret having the best version of something? We've had this conversation a few times in the office where once you've tasted something genuinely really good, especially if you've had it more than once, it's very hard to ever go back at that point.
Wine. Wine is that for
Yeah.
me because I think before my journey into understanding wine, I was very happy with whatever wine. If it was cold and crisp, it did the job. Where actually now I'm more interested in understanding where and what and who has made the wine, and to some degree have an element of complexity. I mean, there is always a place for a very quaffable, crisp, um, simple, for want of better term, sort of rosé or whatever in the sunshine, but you still kind of want to know where it is come from, that it's done the right thing. So I think with wine, for me now, I know that the more you spend, the better you get, again, within reason. And it becomes difficult to go back to the cheap plonk.
Yeah, definitely, especially nowadays. I always had this sweet spot of 15 to 30 quid, you'd manage to get pretty amazing wines, especially if you put a foot outside the box and some of those
Mm-hmm.
Greeks and Amavro rosés and all those kind of mineral Eastern Mediterranean wines from Lebanon and Cyprus and Greece and that sort of space. Really amazing wines for the quality. Although you could buy the Gaia Acertico, that lovely Santorini wild ferment Greek wine, 10 years ago when I started Novel Wines. You could pick that up for 15 quid. Now it's regularly £45 and up. It's probably, if anyone ever talks about wine investment, you need to wind back the clock 10 years, put some money into Greek Acertico,
Yeah.
sit on it for 10 years and you'll be all right now. But there you go. um, what's interesting, I think, I mean, do you have, while we're on wine, um, a piece of advice of how wine can become as interesting as food when you're doing things like you do on sorted food and people aren't physically in the room? Because the food stuff, there's obviously food on primetime telly, there's food competitions all the time. You've got a very successful YouTube channel. Apart from, the kind of hits of Oz and James's wine adventures and
Yeah.
the flash in the pan of the wine show that got some A-list celebrity talent on there, you don't often see good wine media. Do you think there's something wine misses on that format that doesn't really gel with people?
I'm not sure that it misses. I think to some extent it doesn't have the opportunity, and that's on the basis of visuals. So the thing with food is through a screen, and bearing in mind we've been doing this 15 years, nobody can smell or taste our food. So they have to rely on our conversations and our passion and our storytelling and the visuals. But the thing is, food looks great, and you can see whether it's the chopping and the skill of the chef, or whether it's the sizzling and the bubbling, or the simmering in pans, or whether it's the plating and the aesthetics of beautiful food and color on a plate. There's lots to play with, right the way down to crockery and table settings and all of that. With wine, yes, there is a sliding scale of color, but it's still just wine in a glass. So you lose a lot of that appeal through the screen, which means you have to absolutely double down on the people and the place and the passions and the provenance, all the P's of the production of wine. Um, so that you're kind of playing almost with one hand behind your back because you haven't got all the visual elements, I don't think, that food can offer. And I think that's the challenge because, well, that and I suppose the argument that we talked about pretentious ingredients, but wine still sadly is pretentious in many people's eyes. Everyone eats, everyone has to do food, and whether it's a bowl of cereal in the morning or multi Michelin star dinner in the evening, everyone is engaging with food all day long. Whereas wine, you're already limited to a percentage of the audience who drink it, and then a tiny percentage of people who really care about it. So there's those two challenges that I think mean that wine has always struggled in the media, which is a shame because I love it a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because it does then resonate with why things like Oz and James's show was such a success because it is people and place more than,
It's all
it's a
personality led.
travel show, isn't it? Before it's even anything else. I mean, talking about travel, we both went to Loire last year to meet Lionel Gossam, who makes a great Gamay wine. What you've mentioned you've done a lot of travel for sorted food. What's the country that I guess has surprised you the most in terms of food discovery or even things that you may have known food wise, but that you would go back to in a heartbeat for their food.
Yeah, I mean, I've always traveled for food. And I think, again, winding back the clock, probably 10, 15 years, there were places that I just desperately wanted to go for the food. And if I couldn't find a friend or family to travel with, I would just go alone. And I actually did a lot of solo travel in group travel. Companies like G Adventures, I've done a lot of their tours where you bundle in with 11 other travelers who are also there to experience the place, but you haven't met until day one. And I actually quite enjoy that. But I always pick places based on the cuisine and the food that I want to learn about. And the first one was Morocco, which I loved. Um, but since then, India, China, Mexico was amazing, Japan, they're all places where it's the cuisine that's made me go, I want to go there. And then all the other stuff that comes around it and all the other things that are worth visiting and seeing, but food first. And I think Mexico was the one that surprised me most because whilst we have some pretty decent Mexican food in London, um, it is a tiny fraction of what is available and the variety that is available across Mexico, which is a huge country with so much regional difference and diversity of landscape and climates and stuff that, of course, the food changes as regionally as it does in Italy. But we just think Mexican food is Mexican food. So that really opened up my eye to traveling around Mexico and seeing from Mexico City to Oaxaca to Pueblo up to Palenque and the rainforest kind of vibes. It changed so much. And I loved it.
Do you have one dish if someone's going to Mexico that they should definitely try? Anything that sticks in your mind?
Oh, what did I have? There's now I'm going to get the name of it. It's an
Put you
amazing
on the
dish.
spot.
I'll come back on the name. It's an amazing dish that is cooked inside what looks like greaseproof paper meets cling film, but it's actually the outer skin of the agave plant, and it's what keeps it from dehydrating in the desert. It's waterproof casing, and it's on the outside. And they basically peel it off, and then they cook an entire meal inside of it. And the one we had was with rabbit and lots of delicious tomatoes and chili, and it was so good. But it's all kind of stewed down, and you think it was really freaking hot weather-wise. And it was the last thing you want is a rabbit stew that's been cooked in a bag as you're in this sweltering heat. But it was so delicious; I just could not get enough of it.
That sounds amazing. Well, if you remember the name, let me know, and I'll put it in the
Yeah, we'll,
comments.
we'll put it
Get
in the
people
show
to have a
notes.
look. Yeah. No, I mean I'm the same. I love traveling. I think part of this discovery thing for food, and it's always interesting. I think because one of my biggest loves about the UK, particularly on the wine side, but then also the food side, is the diversity that we have today. That's happened quite rapidly because I only entered the food and wine industry 10 a bit years ago. But even in that time, the amount of choice and variety you can now get from countries all over the world, and good
Yeah,
examples of it as well, because it is so competitive and such a saturated space, you tend to get this real innovation and quality level. So I think we're incredibly lucky in the UK to have so many different cultural cuisines and wines to try. But I'm always fascinated by how much we don't have in terms of when you go to another country and explore that diversity and interest. The one
yeah,
place I haven't been is India, and well, I've been to lots, haven't been to a lot of places, but India and Indian food, and actually Nepalese food as well. I've got really into discovering a lot of those dishes and finding those kind of chefs that are maybe innovating in that space and doing interesting things, especially on the street food, small plate side, and
yeah.
they've captured different parts of the region. How is India for you going there and exploring it in person?
I mean, unreal. And I have been to Goa in the south, but otherwise I've kind of done the cliche golden triangle. So there's still so much more of India to explore. And in fact, watching the latest series of Race Across the World, which I love, again, just seeing them travel through Nepal and China and India, but to some places that aren't on everybody's, bucket list, but absolutely should be because they just look amazing in terms of the landscapes and the people, but how regionally the food changes. But I was lucky enough to do a food tour when I was in Delhi. And actually, it's an amazing YouTube channel, Delhi Food Walks. And he was just setting it up when he started. Well, no, he was looking to set it up when he started. And I booked a tour with him. And he basically said, can I just rack your brains of what you do on YouTube and how you do it? Because I'd love to learn from you. And I was like, absolutely, providing you show me some awesome food in Delhi. And that was the exchange. and he showed me some incredible food. And from waving down tuk tuks to go across the city to get this one particular dish that had been cooked on that street corner by this one two generational family forever and ever, and they just did one thing, but it was the best place in the city to get that one thing. Or the rice pudding, the lentils, everything about it was amazing. And I rolled back into my hotel room that night, having eaten so much food, and all the fears and sometimes scaremongering around the safety of food on the streets and the deli belly situation. Everything I ate was on the street, and I had absolutely no problems. It was all delicious, and it was all cooked fresh every single day. I loved it.
Yeah, it's. I wonder if you've done it the right way around though, which is to get a guide who really knows the best places. But in
For
the
sure.
same way, if you went to like, if I went to London and you were going to take me around London, you probably know the better places to eat. Whereas if you came to Bath, I've got a few places I could show you in Bath. It's that local guide and local knowledge. I think is quite valuable if you're open to tasting a lot of stuff because it can present some really interesting experiences to
Yeah.
go and try new flavors. Is there I'm going to ask you some fun questions in a little bit because I've got a crowd of people desperate to get insights into what they should cook at home and all that sort of stuff. But I'm just fascinated on the flavor points. As I've got older, and I realize I'm only 31, but as I got older, I've moved into this category now where bitterness has become really interesting. So that citrus note has moved into almost grapefruit bittersweetness. I've
Hmm.
found myself loving Manhattans, Negronis, all that sort of stuff. Always bring it back to drink. But do you think I mean, I think a lot of it depends on what you eat and the context around, but as your taste buds change, especially if you like tasting lots of different things. And I've heard people talk about in the tea tastings and stuff where as you get older, your taste buds narrow and you have less of them
Yeah.
and you don't taste as much anymore. But I've got more curious as I've got older, so that's the interesting part of that. How have your taste buds changed since you sort of started as a chef to where you are now?
Um, I think they echo what you've just said actually toward bitter, bitter and sour. I'm really acid in food and cooking. I think is often the missing element, and of a lot of again back to normal home cooks. You sort of say season your food, and a lot of people will throw salt at it, and that's spot on. That's absolutely correct, but that's only one sort of corner of the triangle, and the other two being sweetness and acid. And I think it's the acid that often people miss when they are seasoning food. So I think acid is really key. But for me, bitterness, I agree. I was just over a year ago, I was in Sydney, and we found this incredible bar that just did Negronis, and the cocktail menu was like a Bible. Like it honestly, it was like 40 pages long, and they were all just Negroni, and it was just the amount of bitters from around the world. Um, just phenomenal. And then loads of different vermouth and some that had twisted so far they were barely a Negroni anymore, but they were still leaning into that short, really strong, bitter, almost syrupy sometimes deliciousness. So bitter and sour for me are the ones I now lean into. Whereas I think when we're younger, we're always persuaded by sugar and sweetness. But over the years, I have a sweet tooth still, but I've moved away from that.
Yeah, interesting. I'm surprised you ever left that Negroni bar. I think I'd still be there.
It
Sounds
was a
great.
challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was also, so I grew up in a family that we always have pudding. My mum loved baking
Yep.
cakes and stuff. So I had a sweet tooth, but interestingly, sweet drinks, not interested at all nowadays. It's definitely on that bitter side. Um, you've got to be careful with the acidity thing with wine, though, because as you drink more and more wine, I mean, now I have room temperature Mosel Riesling, and I'm quite happy about it because the
Yep.
acidity just it gets quite addictive, to be honest. I think one of the wonderful things about acidity in white wine is have you ever had a bottle of white that's been nicely chilled, but then you've had like a three course and you don't put it back in the fridge or the ice bucket, but you leave it on the table? That for me is one of the nicest things about a food and wine experience where the same wine is very different at the
Evolves.
beginning of the meal
Yeah.
and just evolves through it. And that acidity comes through really nicely, probably to actually season some of the food that might not quite have the acidity in it.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think that's a bit, I mean, I think there's two trains of thought with food pairings with wine, and how much science there is to it, and how much it is just if you like it, it works. That's fine. But I would say the acidity is the biggest key that a wine can cut through rich food. In the same way that salty food or well seasoned food can really elevate a wine. I think that's the two, for me, two rules of thumb: acid in wine and salt in food. That's what makes a food pairing work. And there's a lot more complexity to that for sure. But if they were the two simple takeouts, that's where it'd be.
Yeah, I agree with you that definitely. I've got to ask you some of these questions then. So let's have a bit of a fun run. This is for the home cooks out there,
Okay,
and was kind of crowdsourced a little bit when I said I was going to start this up and
excellent.
who I was going to get on in the first couple of weeks. And these were the burning questions of people at home. The fun one to kick off with is, why is all fried food so tasty? And I think this came out of we were talking about tempura courgettes and fried squid wings and all that sort of stuff, where just that fried note is always so delicious. Is it the batter? Is it the frying? What makes that so nice to eat?
I think a lot of it is situational, I would say, because I don't think we do much in the way of deep frying at home in our homes. So generally, when you're having fried food, you're out. So you're already on cloud nine. You're always enjoying the experience, whether it's street food or fried scampi and chips on the beach or whatever it is. You're already in a nice situation where the food is adding to it. So I think that helps. But I think also, just down to the crux of it, fat is good. Fried food usually comes with texture and crunch, which we like. Even the sound of crunching into something can make you salivate, and triggers all sorts of things in your brain. So I think it's all those things together. Golden brown foods are some of our favorite the world over, and every cuisine on the planet finds something they can fry. So it's not a new thing, even though 90% of street food now is all fried. It's been around forever.
What's your number one fried food? Do you have one?
Good question. Going back to places like Japan, you mentioned tempura, but actually, what I love about tempura is then when it's put into the broth with udon noodles. So it starts fried, but then it actually ends up kind of soggy, but still with all that fatty richness and a very different texture. But also fried on a flat grill, like an okonomiyaki. So it's more like a plancha style, but that kind of, it's fried but not deep fried. Those are good, and you can't beat fish and chips. I'm sorry. I know I know I'm a Brit and I know we get stuck in our ways, but fish and chips, I have a soft place in my heart for that.
Very nice. I've got two because I couldn't pick one. I was trying to pick one, but one of them is, those like thin cut aubergines that have been tempered and deep fried with that Pedro Jimenez kind of glaze on.
Hmm.
Amazing. And then the other one is a classic onion bhaji. Just can't get away from how Moorish one of those is. But
And it's
anyway,
that combination. That's a textural thing for me, because yes, you got the spice and the spicing, but also you got the really crispy bits, and then almost like the doughy, like the gram flour doughiness, which is not an uncooked dough. It's just the fact that it's made from a chickpea flour means that, yeah, any bhaji, but onion bhaji, win-win.
yeah, delicious. Um, all right, here's one of the most popular questions is there a secret sauce? And I mean that literally, as in a sauce that if you were having a date or just wanted to impress at a dinner party, because the thing that kept coming up was when you go to a restaurant, some of the sauces and reductions there are amazing and really hard to replicate at home. Getting these conversations where Neve, my wife, and I would make a very different style of curry. And she writes hers down, and it's quite consistent. Mine's experimental and changes probably
Yeah.
every time I cook it. Um, but the way the flavor changes is really interesting. For us, it's just slow and long is the cheat, and probably fat as well. To be fair,
Yeah.
but is there a chef cheat?
I think if you're talking about sort of restaurant classic French cuisine, then it is always the bone reductions that gives you the depth in a jus, which might later have cream and butter and fat added to it. But it is the depth that comes from bones, which is why we love things like ramen as well. And it's the depth of the bone stock. But I would also counter that with, back to my love of acid and fresh, something like a chimichurri or a salsa verde. I think, again, it's a sauce that's often made with raw garlic and vinegar. with oil and loads of fresh herbs. But that cuts through so much, and you can put it on whether it's roasted veggies or grilled meats or fish, or just dip bread into it, and it's just zingy and fresh and vibrant and visually lifts a plate. Back to what we were saying earlier about food being something for the eyes, it looks great, but then it just excites your tongue. So I would say a chimichurri or a salsa verde, that kind of green herby, zingy zippy, high acid dip.
Very nice. It's very hard to do this without getting incredibly hungry is is the
Salivating,
only
yeah.
challenge. Yeah, exactly. Um, all right, this is probably one from me actually. So wine people, we're obsessed with smell. To the point where I think when I don't know if you did this when you did your WSETs, but I went around the supermarket and started sniffing all the fruits and veg and stuff like that. And you know, you go to the seaside and you smell the rocks or the sea or
Mm.
whatever. And I've got to the point where I trained my nose now to a level where I smell things I don't necessarily want to smell when I'm out and about, just through the fact that when you use it a lot, you know, you
Yeah,
notice
yeah,
it
it's a
and you get
muscle. Yeah,
better
yeah.
at it. Yeah. What's your opinion on, you know, if people, because I mean, some people see that swirling of the wine and sniffing it as quite pretentious. And food, I think, as you say, is for everyone. Do you think we underappreciate the role of smell in food?
Yes, I think we do. Um, but I don't think it's on the same par as wine. And maybe that is, again, back to our conversation, there's less to see in wine. So you have to go in with your nose rather than your eyes, generally. I mean, you can identify lots of things by sight, but actually your nose is going to give you more. And I remember learning about the wine, and floral is a very broad generic thing, and I kind of understood what that meant. It was only going through the WST level probably 3 that I was like, I had to understand what acacia or violet or honeysuckle or what these individual flowers, not just floral, but what these individual jasmine, what these individual white flowers, or what they meant. And you have to train your brain to lock it in. We have not done that with food. So we will say citrusy, but we don't know whether that's a kumquat or a calamansi lime or a bergamot, right? It's all just citrus. So we haven't gone to that depth with food, I don't think. Some people have, obviously, to the nth degree, but generally, we broadly categorize smell because we've got sight and texture and all the others to play with as well. Where in wine, you've kind of got some of those taken away. So you have to really dial up on the nuance of each one. Um, when I worked in a restaurant many years ago in the pastry section of a restaurant, which was open plan and looked out across the restaurant, and almost involuntary tables. It wasn't a particularly pretentious place, but it was French, but it was more like a gastropub. Really good food. When the food was brought to the table, and they would try to bring everyone's food together and it would go down on the table, if it was savory food, the whole table, you could almost see it orchestrated, would lean in to smell it, which is interesting because then you put dessert on the table from the pastry kitchen, and almost in sync, everyone would lean back to look at it. And I just thought that was really, you could almost tell which course a table was on by whether they all leaned in to smell their plate or leaned out to look at it. And that was a really fascinating observation based on, sample of one restaurant. But generally speaking, main course and savory, people do lean in to sniff their plate. Whereas for desserts, it's all about how it looks. But I don't think we do enough with smell, full stop.
Yeah, I mean that's fascinating. I think the two smells with food that stick in my head actually are the other end of the process, so the fresh side where I remember walking, I mean it was my honeymoon, so maybe I was in a good mood, but walking through um the Amalfi trees when all the lemons were really ripe and just
Yeah.
how lemony that smelt. I don't think I'd smelt that level of lemon blossom and lemon before.
Yep.
It was something quite different from, you know, I've smelt like very lemony smells like lemon oils and that sort of thing. But this was a different kind. And then the one I'm completely addicted to, and I do have a question on this because a surprising number of people have asked about it, is the smell of a vine tomato, which I think is a lot actually to do with my granddad used to grow tomatoes and, you know, smelling them as a kid. They were really interesting. And now every time I get a pack of tomatoes on my food shop, the first thing I do is smell the vine because it's
Yep.
quite addictive. But someone's asked, in fact, a lot of people have asked, they kind of said the general question of if you are going around somewhere and you need to spot a really good piece of fruit or veg, is there a cheat to it? But also the big one was how do you know if the tomatoes are any good?
It is difficult. And a lot of it comes down to trust of where you're buying it from, and whether you trust the person who knows where they've got it from. I mean, you're so right with vine tomatoes and the smell. I posted something on Instagram a couple of weeks ago. It was British Tomato Fortnight, and just a photo of Isle of Wight tomatoes. And my caption was, "Can you smell this photo?" Because I think everyone has that smell just locked in when you see cherry tomatoes that are ripe and shiny and glowing, but on the vine, it's so important. Um, but when you're picking them, I mean, I was in Provence last week, and some of the markets were just incredible, and the waft of smell from peaches and apricots and cherries and tomatoes sort of coming from the stalls. But quite rightly, big signs everywhere that said "Do not touch the peaches," because I think people go around and like give them all a squeeze, don't they? And I think it's the same with tomatoes. You probably want to give them a bit of a squeeze, and they shouldn't be fridge cold, and you want to pick them up and sniff them, but that's probably not good practice in a market space. You just have to trust where you're buying it from and know that they're going to give you the good stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I think that can be the challenge when you find that right supplier. Um, that's the special bit. They were really nice about the pandemic because it had a lot of downs, but the nice thing was the way people invested in their local communities. And I know that it's hard for people to sustain that when they went back to normal life because, you know, the convenience thing is so
Mm.
vital for a lot of people. Um, but the ones that held on, I think, are where you had that level of trust that was built during those times where you knew the quality is always going to be great. And whether, you know, post pandemic, it might have turned into a treat rather than a regular thing. But I think what it did was open people up to the quality that's in their farm shops, in their grocers, and their butchers. And in a way, it needed a bit of that revival of come in here and see what it could
Yep.
be like, you know, which I
And I
think was
think,
really good.
and I am very fortunate. I speak from a place of privilege, and this is a very idealistic kind of viewpoint. But I'd heard somebody say the other day, and I completely agree that yes, these sort of artisanal, whether you find a cheesemonger or an independent wine merchant or something, and yes, it's more expensive, but that's because it's better quality. But also, you're paying for not just their experience, but the conversation. And this person I was speaking to, she basically said, "I don't mind paying a bit more because I have a nice chat." And actually, she was almost paying. She was like happy to pay for the conversation, because it was the highlight of her week was going to the farmers market, and she chatted to every stallholder. And yes, she paid a bit more than the supermarket, but the quality was better, and she had several lovely conversations with lovely people, and that was kind of what she was parting cash with. And I think that's really important, is knowing where you get your food from, and that is not practical because we're all incredibly busy, and online delivery and grocery and convenience and all this kind of stuff, or just grab and go, is unfortunately a way of life. But finding and etching out a little bit of time occasionally to do the right thing that enriches you, not just from food and nutrition, but from conversations with people who know more than you do, I think that's really healthy.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I feel like that also then gives you a context when you go home and eat that thing where you're almost inclined to enjoy it more. I love this
Yeah,
debate around context and taste. You know, the whole, oh, it was amazing on holiday, but I brought it home and it tasted rubbish thing that I've heard
done a few of those. Yeah,
countless times. um,
I always blame it on
but
packing it in the hold. I'm sure there's something about the altitude that changes it, because it's not the same when I get it home.
yeah, it's morphed into something on the fly. Um, no, I really appreciate talking about this. I mean, one thing I think that's quite important to talk about, which kind of goes into what we've been discussing anyway. Um, sustainability wise, there's a lot of there's a lot I think now of conscious buying coming in. Although I know the figures and I know that actually it's still for a lot of people it's the cherry on top of everything, and
Hmm.
there's other things that are far more important when people are buying food and wine and whatever it is they're doing. Especially in a cost of living crisis, not everyone can afford to make those choices. But do you think there's a plan or things that we're doing where people can start to eat and drink better? It's a very broad question, that one.
Yeah, it. I think it comes down to a shift of perception, choice, and removing the excess that we have been lucky enough to have for the last few decades. Because I think most people can afford to eat better, but they need to eat less of the other stuff. And I think it's just a shifting of priorities. But again, I am not feeding a family of four while trying to hold down busy jobs and school runs and extracurricular activities, in which case it's about getting dinner on the table. I wholly appreciate that. But I think understanding more about where your food comes from often does that heavy lifting for you, because in the same way that, and we live in a world of social media where being the first person to try this new food trend or visit this new cafe that's just opened or this first sort of single origin coffee bean or chocolate bar, like being the first to do it has a social currency. I think knowing what you're eating comes with like an elevation of feeling that goes beyond just the food. So there's no longer any sort of, not that there should be any guilt ever attached to food, but you actually sort of feel like you've risen above, and I've paid a bit more for this, and I feel good about it. And it's maybe a sad truth, a crazy statistic, that most charitable donations are completely selfish, in the sense it's how it makes you feel giving rather than what it's doing. But actually, that's where our food should be. If you feel good about buying something you know has come from the right place, then wallow in that goodness. I think that's a good thing. But it's not easy, and it's getting harder and harder.
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things I've seen you do is get involved in a lot of education around food, and especially of young people as well. And I imagine that's quite a large part of that, knowing where your food comes from and being able to have those informed conversations, because there's a lot of stuff out there, right, that may or may not be true, but also, to make people comfortable to explore stuff, because there is this intimidation around tasting. And I'd love, probably selfishly on my part as well, because I've got things like Gruner and St. Laurent to sell, but I'd love people to all have the confidence to step outside the box and be as curious as a lot of us food and wine lovers are, to go and try something new all the time. I think that would be really exciting.
Yeah,
Look,
I think it's just never stop weaning is our kind of phrase of the moment, because kids, obviously, they you wean them onto solid foods, and then weaning kind of stops because habits kick in. But as adults, and we're in our late 30s, every time we lift the cloche in the studio on something new, we are still weaning onto new stuff, and we have an addiction for new things and trying it. We don't have to like it always, but continually keep trying. And I think if adults continued to wean more often, I think we'd be in a better place.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you can see even after 15 years that you guys all have a really strong shared passion, and Kush who's joined you as well, and
Yep,
James who's
Kush and
did a
James, the
stint
whole
and
team.
back, and yeah, like the passion is there definitely. So I mean, I know you're a busy man. Thank you for talking. Almost an hour of interest and flavour. I mean, I could talk to you all day about this sort of stuff. But before you go, this is a bit of a cheat because I've nicked it from several other podcasts. But
Excellent.
if you could have one meal before, let's say it was all going to wrap up tomorrow, you got one plate of food. Let's keep it to the one. It's very difficult putting you on the spot. But
I mean, I've
what
already
would you
said
eat?
it, and I think I'm going to repeat it. And I think that's honestly a really good fish and chips, sustainably
Yeah.
caught, proper crispy batter, beer batter, decent chips, not necessarily like triple cooked, but just decent chips, a good tartar sauce, maybe a squeeze of ketchup, and something cold, fizzy, high acid to go with it, a cider, or probably a sparkling wine, an English sparkling wine with fish and chips. There we go.
Well, that'd be delicious. Any mushy peas?
No,
Certainly
they can
not.
stay in the
No.
bin. No, not interested. I love peas, but they don't need to be mushy.
Yeah, no, fair enough. All right, brilliant. Well, thanks, Ben. I appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of LA, and I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, catch up soon. Cheers, Ben.